Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle, and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. You can also hear the podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify podcasts. And you can also check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There you will get early access to reviews. You will also get write-ups on older movies that I watched throughout the months, as well as some deep dives, and as well as some other things during Oscar and film festival season. And you can also see me live stream at twitch.tv/ScuttleLemur, and it's been a lot of fun. Hopefully going to have some more guests coming up in the future. It just kind of depends on what my schedule looks like, because from August to the end of the year, it's going to be kind of crazy even before you figure in my regular job. So it's at twitch.tv/ScuttleLemur. This is actually the second take on this podcast. We tried recording this last week, and we did pretty well until my computer decided that it wanted to shut down before I had a chance to save the podcast. So this is basically take two of this interview with a film critic I met on Twitter a few years ago, and we've had some good back and forths, and I've wanted to have him on the podcast, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Kip Mooney. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
Before we get started, since this is your first time on the podcast, and well, technically second, but the first time hopefully people will get to hear, what drew you to writing about and discussing movies?
Yeah, so I always tell people kind of the light bulb moment for me was when I was 12 or so, and my parents took my sister and me to see a screening of Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. And that was seeing that on the big screen really just kind of ignited my passion for film, and started to shift my focus away from other things that I was interested in, and made that kind of my main obsession.
Mm-hmm. Where can people find your written work?
Yeah, so I primarily write for collegemoviereview.com. Been there for almost a decade now, which is kind of hard to believe. And I also write for centraltrack.com. Been there for, I guess, 6 years or so. And I occasionally write reviews, but pre-pandemic, and then only started up again last month. I mostly just write a column about what movies are coming out each month.
Okay.
And I've also contributed to The Spool. Usually in their Filmmaker of the Month pieces, usually if it's a filmmaker I, really love, I'll volunteer to write a piece I've written about Spike Lee's Clockers and Sam Raimi's A Simple Plan. And it's a great site. I don't know if you know Clint Worthington, but he runs that site and does a great job.
Okay, excellent. I always enjoy getting to. I always, you talking about writing about movies that you kind of enjoy, especially ones that kind of fall under the radar of filmmakers' careers. I mean, Clockers certainly is like that for Spike Lee, and even though it was Oscar nominated, I would easily say that Simple Plan is kind of undervalued, I think, by a lot of film fans in Sam Raimi's career. And I know that's one of the things I've always kind of been fascinated by, are movies that are a bit under the radar for certain directors. I know recently I'm doing, I'm kind of in the middle of doing a full rewatch of Alex Proyas's work, who did The Crow, did Dark City, and I think one of the movies I think a movie that I really enjoy of his that not enough people know about is Garage Days, which he did between Dark City and iRobot, and it was basically an independent rock music comedy they did in Australia. It's really an enjoyable film, but it barely got released in the States. So it's been kind of under the radar, but if you look at it, it's still, even though it doesn't have a lot of the same big ideas that Proyas had in some of his other work, you can still see his signature, his visual style, kind of, as well as his appreciation of using rock songs in film as well as score. And what are some movies from some of your favorite filmmakers that may fall under the radar that you really appreciate?
Yeah. As soon as you started kind of going down this route, I was thinking, and the first one that came to mind was Martin Scorsese's Bringing Out the Dead, which came out in 1999 and stars Nicolas Cage as a paramedic, kind of haunted by the people that he couldn't save. And it really, Roger Ebert was a big fan of it, but it did not make a lot of money. It's out of print on DVD, and I don't think it's ever been released on Blu-ray or anything. But I would put it up there with his best work. And unsurprisingly, it's another collaboration with Paul Schrader, who tends to be the screenwriter who, gets Scorsese, they get each other and kind of visions are. And it's just tremendous. And especially watching it last year as kind of the pandemic was taking off, it just really hits a lot harder. Just, people trying to find connection, people, being with you and conscious, and then the next minute they're gone, and all that. It's a really powerful movie, and I definitely hope people seek it out.
Yeah, I actually, Bring Out the Dead admittedly was a movie I was not a big fan of in 1999. I just, for some reason, it just didn't connect with me like a lot of the other movies of that year did. But I've watched it a couple of other times, and then the most recent for a discussion on the podcast when I went through the films of 1999, and I really, and maybe it's because of the fact that I'm so much older now than I was in 1999, and it's just something that connects with me. I mean, it helps that I'm much more in tune with Nicolas Cage as a performer and Martin Scorsese as a filmmaker. And you're right, that collaboration between him and Paul Schrader, which, I mean, obviously is Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, but also includes The Last Temptation of Christ, which feels about as far removed from those films as anything. But at the same time, you can see the connective tissue between all of those films that Scorsese and Schrader have done together. But yeah, that's a movie that it's funny because most people, when they say like sort of forgotten movies with Scorsese or movies that are kind of under the radar, most people say After Hours, which is another terrific example. But I think even more, Bringing Out the Dead is a wonderful example of that because of the fact that it very much is a Scorsese movie in a lot of ways, thematically, emotionally, the fact that it's in New York, the energy that the film has. But it is a movie that just didn't land with audiences when it first came out, and it's just really, it's fascinating. And yeah, it's one of those movies where it's like it's a fallacy that you can essentially watch anything right now because of streaming and all of that stuff. Because yes, I could rent Bring Out the Dead, but I can't own a physical copy of it. Like you said, I would have to put down for DVD because it was never put on Blu-ray. And it's always interesting to me. It's interesting to me that there's so many films of the past 30 years, but even the past 20 years that just don't really, they seem to kind of get forgotten. And it's really kind of a shame that, and Bringing Out the Dead, you would expect somebody like Kino Lorber or maybe even Criterion Collection to pick it up and give it a good release, but for some reason it just hasn't happened.
Yeah, and even Paramount, they're really stepping up their game with Blu-ray releases, but some movies they're releasing on Blu-ray now are just, I don't know anyone who is clamoring for those, and yet don't bring that not on the radar at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's one of those things where it's like I have to. You almost are probably hoping that somewhere down the road you're gonna get like a box of collaborations between Scorsese and Schrader to bring all these different movies that they did together, and it's weird. I'm fascinated by I'm a huge fan of Nicolas Cage. I mean, I just love the energy it brings to certain movies, and it's fascinating to see him collaborate with filmmakers like Scorsese and like Werner Herzog, where it's like you think, oh, that makes all the sense in the world that they would collaborate, and it's a shame that you don't really see them collaborate again, because you would think that that would be such a rich dynamic. But I mean, honestly, if you think about Scorsese, he really hasn't done anything else that you would think, oh, Nicolas Cage should be in this movie.
That's true. Yeah, he's he's done all kinds of movies, but yeah, there's not one that you immediately go, oh, Nicolas Cage should definitely be in this. Yeah.
Have you now, since we're on the subject of Nicolas Cage, have you watched Pig yet?
I have not, unfortunately, but I really do want to see it, because anytime I hear that there's either an exceptionally bad Nicolas Cage movie or an exceptionally good Nicolas Cage movie, I get excited, because a lot of the stuff that he does lately, it's not even worth watching because it's not so bad it's good, but it's not quality either. So when it's one of those extremes, I definitely get excited. So hopefully we'll get a chance to check it out soon.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be on demand next week. I think, if I remember correctly, because I did get a chance to watch it before it came out, and I thought I absolutely loved it. I mean, it's one of the best performances Cage has given, and I think it's just it's great because of the fact that it plays off of what we expect from Cage, or what we might be expecting off of Cage, and instead it goes for something else, and it's not the movie that you necessarily expect from the trailer, and I think, and to a certain extent, that's kind of a good thing, because there are some movies where it's like, oh, if you don't get what you expect in the trailer, oh, you're going to be disappointed, but there are other movies that use that understanding of how trailers work and how trailers can lure you in, that make you realize, oh wait, this is not going to be that movie at all, but I'm so intrigued with it, I'm so engaged with it that it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
What are some of the favorite movies that you've enjoyed this past year?
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff because my watch list is never ending, and subject to the vagaries of what's streaming, what's available at the library, that kind of stuff. But my first movie back at the movie theater since March of last year was Nobody with Bob Odenkirk, and just want to pause to give him some well wishes.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like he's recovering pretty well from his heart attack this week.
Yeah.
But Nobody was really enjoyable because it does go for that sort of John Wick style action, but it still is self-aware enough to be a little ridiculous and understand how absurd the whole premise is. So that was a lot of fun, but I've actually been to the theater a lot. Most of my friends, they've maybe been to the theater once, if at all, since restrictions lifted, but I've been 8-9 times already, and going again tomorrow to see The Green Knight, which I'm excited for.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I'll be curious to get your thoughts on that one. My wife and I watched it last night. It wasn't quite what she was expecting, and she's not a huge fan of like the slow burn type of movie. I'm still kind of processing my thoughts. I'm probably, I'm a few paragraphs into my review, but I'm not quite out where I want to close yet. So I'll be definitely curious to hear your thoughts on Twitter on that.
Yeah. And then we did go to see Old last week, which I actually thought was terrific. I know it's been pretty polarizing for people, and I would consider myself a fan of Shyamalan's work, but I'm not one of those people who thinks that The Happening is actually a misunderstood masterpiece. I think that movie's pretty terrible, has a great premise, but the execution was awful. But I have liked some of his more recent work. I wasn't a fan of Glass, but you could tell that was like, this was his vision for it. This was not a studio notes compromise. But I actually thought Old was really great and kind of moving and disturbing until the last 10 minutes or so is pretty silly when you find out what's actually going on.
Yeah.
But we liked it a lot. And then the movie that I have not been able to stop thinking about that I watched this week is the documentary Crumb about Robert Crumb. Came out in the 90s, and I really just have never seen anything like it because it's, ostensibly a documentary about art and censorship kind of, and like, what in a polite society, like, is there room for art that is extremely problematic and provocative, and maybe the artist doesn't even necessarily have an awareness of how his art could be perceived by people. But then it's also about, his family and how, they all suffer from mental illness, and him with his perverse drawings is like the most well-adjusted member of the family, which is fascinating. So I really liked it because, I've seen, plenty of documentaries over the years, but nothing quite like that.
Yeah, it's been many years since I've watched Crumb. I think it was like the late 90s that I'd seen it, and it was something else when I watched it. I definitely need to watch it again at some point. Old. It's funny because of the fact that I think I would say that I really liked Old, but I also would say I would agree with you about the ending. But it's funny because one of the things I've said as far as the ending, where it's like, I feel like that might have been, because obviously that something's happening, something's going on with regards to the resort that they're in, but you're not quite sure what. And I almost feel like, granted, Shyamalan would never necessarily do this because that's not the filmmaker he is. I almost feel like if they had gone for more of the cabin in the woods thing, where like you see that part going concurrently, I feel like that might have worked better.
Yeah.
But overall, I was, DW from NostalgiaCast got into a bit of a tizzy when, or he had his mentions kind of blow up last week when he said like that Shyamalan hasn't directed a naturalistic performance since like 2004, and it's hard not to argue with that when you look at the performances in Old.
Yeah, I would say, because it got a lot of, because they released, some clips online, which I always think is a bad idea. But, people were talking about how the dialogue was bad and, the performances were unnatural. But, I thought, while I wouldn't, say any of the performances were awards worthy, like, I thought that they did a good enough job of, like, drawing you in. And, again, it's not like The Happening where some of those line readings are just absolutely laughable.
Yeah.
I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah. No, it's no. I think the performances do enough to keep you engaged in what's going on, and keep trying to figure out sort of like how this is playing out, why this is playing out the way it is, and yeah, I think, like you said, nothing's award worthy in terms of the performances, but I mean, there's certainly enough there to where it holds your interest at least.
Although the only thing that I would say is awards worthy about the movie, even though I did like it a lot, is I think that the makeup, it should.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of movies still to come this year, but they should just go ahead and give the makeup award to that movie for sure.
Yeah. No, the makeup in the movie was phenomenal. I mean, even I'm not a huge. Even I'm, and the thing is, it's like, I know this week I think the cinematography was kind of taking some crap online, but I mean, I didn't mind it. I thought there were certainly some shots that were better than others, and there were some sequences that were shot better than others. But for the most part, I mean, I like at least that Shyamalan is kind of taking chances with some of the ways that he's shooting some of this. And it's like, that's more than you can say with some of the other films that have come out this year.
Absolutely. Well, and plus, I feel like it must have just been a real challenge to shoot because you're constantly having to like mess with the sun. And I'm sure there's some, post work to, make sure the light matches from scene to scene. Having to shoot, at different times of the day to make it look like the day is actually progressing the way it's very impressive, I thought.
Yeah. No, I definitely did. What have you thought of some of the bigger movies that have come out this year? I mean, for the most part, I think this has kind of like been a bit of a lackluster summer in terms of the bigger movies that we've gotten. At least I would think I would think probably the most enjoyable one I've seen so far is probably A Quiet Place 2.
Yeah, I actually like that one quite a bit because I saw the first one, when it came out and thought it was really great. But then rewatching it at home, I thought some of the emotional beats rang kind of false for me. Mm-hmm. So I liked this sequel more than the first actually because it's just all the focus on survival and that opening sequence is just incredible.
Yeah.
That was. But I like that one, and I always like to see Cillian Murphy pop up.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I'm kind of that way with Djimon Hounsou, and it was like it was nice to see him in that even for a few minutes, and I'm glad that he seems to be coming back for the Shazam sequel. It's like I'm kind of disappointed with. I'm always kind of disappointed with the way he's used in his career. Because of the fact that, he has been nominated for Oscars. It's not like he can't do serious stuff. It's that he's basically been typecast as a heavy in so many films. It's really disappointing.
It is, yeah. Especially if you look at his work in America, the Jim Sheridan film. It's just so tender and human, and then when it comes to a big budget movie, they're just like, okay, put some horns or a costume on him and then send him out there. It's definitely a little disappointing. I would agree with you about the summer not being so hot because, I haven't seen anything in the theater so far this year that would have been like, oh, that was terrible, but I haven't really seen anything that's blown me away either. So Black Widow was pretty good and F9 was fine, but there hasn't been anything, amazing that I've seen in the year so far this year. I think my favorite movie so far is probably No Sudden Move. Straight to HBO Max, the new Steven Soderbergh crime drama. Really love that one. But I think all of the big movies, or at least the ones that I'm looking forward to the most, are all coming out in the fall.
Yeah, definitely. I need to catch up on the ones that have been streaming only. I haven't seen No Sun Moves. I haven't seen I haven't seen Mitchell versus the Machines. There are a lot of the animated there are a lot of the streaming only movies that I just haven't had a chance to sit down and watch yet. And it's just one of those things where it's like even with last year was really kind of interesting because of the fact that even though theaters were shut down, there was plenty of stuff to watch, and that was it just wasn't all the big Hollywood stuff. I mean, I think the biggest movies that came out in the second half of last year were Tenet and Wonder Woman 1984. And it's like, I mean, that was basically it. Like most everything else was like, oh, we're just going to either dump it on streaming or we're going to dump it in theaters and just let it die. And sort of like New Mutants and I guess The Empty Man is the other Fox movie.
Yeah, I did actually see New Mutants at the drive-in, and I didn't think it was good, but I've definitely seen worse X-Men movies, including Dark Phoenix, which I can't believe they've now screwed up twice.
Right.
But I did catch The Empty Man, not in theaters, but it was a couple months ago. I had a friend who just kept hyping it up. And so he came over and we watched it, and that was really impressive. I don't know if everybody who sees it will appreciate the length or the ending, but I really hope this guy gets to make some more interesting movies because that was fascinating. I really think Man is great, and it's on HBO Max now, I think, if people haven't checked it out yet. And I am festering boutique Blu-ray labels to release it. If Scream Factory or Arrow would put this out, I would snatch it up in a heartbeat. So maybe we'll get lucky because it was a movie that Fox obviously didn't care about because they dumped it with almost no promotion, last year. So I would not hold this for a Blu-ray or anything like that. So
yeah, well, I mean, Fox/Disney. Let's be completely honest at this point. It's a shame that it is disappointing that there are a lot of movies from Fox, at least of the past year or so, that are sort of, I mean, okay, maybe not a lot, but it seems like there are quite a few that are sort of getting lost in the shuffle with not only with the sale to Disney, but also the release schedule and the lack of theaters this past year or so, and basically like, oh, you're just gonna go out there for a week or two, and we've fulfilled our obligation to at least release this film.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, just the consolidation too, because I feel like Fox Searchlight is not going to be this great home for movies that they acquire at film festivals or anything. They're just going to be mini majors, that they can churn out some biopics or, something that might get a couple Oscar nominations. And then they also, not that I saw a lot of movies from them, but they also shut down Blue Sky Animation.
Yeah.
And, they're just going to pump out Disney product only. And they just wanted to get, basically raid the entire studio for IP. And
yeah, basically. And that is really, that is just a shame in general because of the fact that, I mean, and I know I picked up some Fox Blu-rays and stuff like that over the past year or two because of the fact that, like, I wasn't sure if they were going to be around anymore and or available in the near future. So I picked up Laura, I picked up Grapes of Wrath, I picked up a few others. And some of them are ones that I've seen over the years, and some of them are ones that I haven't. And it's like, I want to at least have access to these before I may not in the future, and that's the biggest issue with the run to streaming is the fact that it's like it's kind of making physical media obsolete, not obsolete, because I don't think the boutique labels will ever completely go away. Or at least go the way of streaming. And I think Criterion does the best job of mixing both worlds on their streaming site because of the fact that, I mean, they not only do they get the licenses to these movies to put them in different playlists and stuff like that. And I'm really fascinated by the John Huston playlist that's coming out this in August from Criterion Channel. But also the fact that they make like some of their Criterions available on streaming with the extras and all of that. And I think it's just such a great way of appreciating the craft that goes into a really good physical media representation of a film, as well as catering to stream people who like watching movies streaming and like having a nice variety to choose from.
Yeah, I think Criterion, probably HBO Max are the best if you're a movie person, because they have the biggest library. And I don't subscribe to Criterion right now just because I have so many other streaming services, and I'm probably the only one who's ever going to be watching anything on the Criterion channel. So I was averaging out to like 1 or 2 movies a month. So it wasn't, I wasn't taking full advantage of all they had to offer. But no, it's great, especially when they get licenses to stream titles that like you are really hard to find now. So like I've a lot of people this month for their film noir month, people have finally gotten to see The Last Seduction with Fiorentino, which is a great movie, which is hard to find.
Yeah.
And I know that when I did have Criterion, that was where I got to see The Swimmer with Burt Lancaster for the first time. Another movie that, you know, until recently you basically could not see.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I do appreciate that about Criterion, especially those interviews and stuff with you know, actors and directors who are big fans of some of the movies. And you know, like that's how because I watched this video where Bill Hader talked about some of his favorite movies in the collection. That's how I discovered this movie from Iran called Where Is My Friend's House, that was really just moving and beautiful, and never would have seen it or heard about it, you know, if it hadn't been for that. So
yeah, no, it's a wonderful It is a wonderful streaming service. I mean, if you're interested in older movies, or if you're interested in just really great curation of movies, I mean, they're terrific. And like you know, and I saw The Long Goodbye for the first time, the Altman film that I had been wanting to see for a while, and I finally got a chance to watch that because of Criterion Channel having it. And I mean, I think it's funny because I do think, at least it was before it hit the channel. I'm not sure if it still is. It was, I want to say Last Seduction is also on Tubi, but they play ads. So, I mean, obviously you're watching it with ads, and that's always less than, you know, that's always less than ideal way of watching any movie. But, yeah, it's Criterion Channel is just absolutely wonderful. And, You're right about HBO Max. I mean, it's like even as loaded of a list that they have, it's disappointing that they don't have some of the other movies. Like they have 2001, but I don't think they have 2010. Yeah, and that disappoints me. And it's like it'd be great to see some. Like there are other older movies like that I remember recording off of there, but I mean some of them are on Criterion, so it's like I can probably find them, but like it feels like a lot of this stuff that they probably bought by MGM in the 80s is just like not available anymore. It's like that's one of the more disappointing things.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that is probably annoying for some people, and I'm speaking from experience here, is that the rights to the Harry Potter series keep bouncing back and forth between HBO Max and Peacock.
Yeah.
I mean, I own them all on Blu-ray, but, you know, they're still packed away in boxes, haven't really set up like shelves or anything for that. And my wife wanted to watch one of them before bed the other night, and it's not on HBO Max. It's back on Peacock, even though HBO Max made a big deal when they launched about doing all of the Harry Potter movies. And even though they're Warner Brothers titles, they're not available on HBO Max. You got to go sign up for to do that.
Yeah.
But Tubi, and that actually, I only go there if that's my only option, but they do have a lot of more interesting titles, some of the stuff that you probably remember seeing at the video store.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting cover. I don't know if that's actually going to be a good movie or not, but they have some more. I think that I don't know who runs, like who's in charge of acquisitions and stuff, but it's obviously someone who appreciates those kind of weird underground movies. So like the few things that I've seen there, I saw Forbidden Zone, the movie that Danny Elfman and his brother made.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just absolutely wild. And I saw Miss 45, the Abel Ferrara movie. And so you tend to have some of these kind of weirder titles that sometimes you can find on other streaming services, but sometimes not. And so it's definitely checking out. And it's free. I mean, can't really beat that.
Yeah, I mean, that's where the ads come in. Yeah, I mean, no, Tubi is actually an interesting. When I was getting ready for Pod earlier this year, the guests had chosen a couple of B grade movies from the '80s and stuff like that. And I looked and it's like, oh hey, two of these are on Tubi. Okay, I can watch these here. And it's great because of the fact that if you enjoy like B genre films, I mean, even if they've got some decent like older movies too. Like there are a couple of there are a couple of pretty good. I saw quite a few pretty good noirs there a few months back, and but yeah, Tubi is an under. I mean, they also have completely bizarre, off the wall stuff that clearly was direct to video at the time, or will have been direct to video now, and it's just completely out there. But they also occasionally you see major studio films there too. So I mean they have a pretty good rotation month in and month out that's worth checking out if you like just exploring sort of like the outer reaches of like film genres. What are so one of the things you mentioned Black Widow earlier, and it's interesting that we just yesterday, I mean, Scarlett Johansson decided to bring a lawsuit against Disney for breach of contract in the day and date release of Black Widow. And it really is kind of surprising that it took so long for somebody to do that. And I mean, more power to her. I mean, it's like especially if they weren't willing to renegotiate because of the streaming issue, that's certainly that's certainly something where her lawsuit is kind of justified in that. I also understand the people who are like, well, it's basically rich people being upset at other rich people, but at the same time, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if she wins, especially, it could have long-lasting impacts on the industry in a good way, because of the fact that means the studios can't necessarily play, funny Hollywood math with with how they choose to release movies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's what's surprising is that they didn't renegotiate or write her a big fat check when they announced that it was going to be on Disney Plus as well. Because to my knowledge, I think that's what Warner Brothers had to do with Gal Gadot and Patty Jenkins for Wonder Woman 1984, is they had to write them each a big check, to make up for that lost money. And it sounds like Disney didn't want to do that. So, yeah, I mean, in situations like this, or when you have like a writer's strike or like a player's strike in pro sports, I mean, almost every time you want to, the side that is in the right is the labor and not the owner. So you're right. It could have long-lasting impact. And I mean, exactly, more power to him, because like I think I just think the tide is kind of shifting because you look at like college sports and the Supreme Court ruled that those players can make money on their name and likeness and all that. So yeah, I think that there's definitely potential for people to finally get what they're owed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the college sports is actually an excellent it's an excellent comparison because of the fact that it's like that's something that really should have happened a long time ago. I mean, and it's ridiculous. I mean, even if you acknowledge that they might have been breaking the rules at the time, they shouldn't have necessarily been rules to begin with because of the fact that, let's face it, the colleges were making money off of them being at the colleges and being as successful as they were. So no, I'm very curious to see what happens with Pixar because of the fact that, I mean, they've got 2 films in a row now that have been streaming only, and it's disheartening. I mean, I know we've gotten quotes that have said it's disheartening for the animators, and it's like it's understandable too because of the fact that it's like they were making these movies with the intent of being seen in theaters, and yet they're not able to do that. And it's like Soul to a certain extent was one thing, but it's like Luca, you probably could have done pretty well this summer with Luca since there really hasn't been a whole lot of competition in the family movie department.
Yeah, not at all. And I mean, animators especially are overworked and underpaid, and so to put all your blood, sweat, and tears into a movie that sometimes takes 3 to 4 years to finish, and they just decided to put it on streaming because it's easier for them to not have to worry about it. Yeah, that would be disheartening. So yeah, it'll be interesting if something comes out of that.
Mm-hmm. Who are to sort of get away from the business side of it? I mean, it's a worthy conversation to be sure, but who are some of your favorite filmmakers that you really appreciate more than others?
I mean, I think some of the obvious ones, Quentin Tarantino, Wes Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, Martin Scorsese, the Coen brothers. A big fan of their work. Even when the movie itself doesn't quite work, it's still more interesting than what a lot of filmmakers put out.
Mm-hmm.
And then for like older filmmakers, I really love Billy Wilder and Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick, of course. I did a deep dive on his movies a couple years ago, and some of those early crime movies are really interesting. And then to have movies as wildly different as 2001, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut, and Barry Lyndon. Almost all of his movies are just completely different and have completely different styles and tones, and yet they're magnificent.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, he's kind of the master for a reason. But yeah, and I mean, newer filmmakers I really like, Jordan Peele and Greta Gerwig and Barry Jenkins, and Bong Joon-ho. Until Parasite came out, I had not seen much of his work. I had seen The Host and I'd seen Snowpiercer.
Yeah.
But after Parasite came out, I went back and saw some of his older films and really loved Memories of Murder and Mother. And he's just a really fascinating filmmaker and another one who can kind of hop around different genres and always make something interesting.
Yeah. No, there's some of the earlier Bong Joon-ho movies I still need to see, like Mother. But yeah, I mean, Parasite's one. I mean, I had seen The Host, I had seen Snowpiercer, and I had seen Okju. So I loved. Well, I wasn't huge. I thought The Host was good. I mean, at the time, I wasn't quite. I think I saw it right around the time that it came out, so it's like I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. I think I was probably expecting more traditional monster movie, but
Right.
Snowpiercer I really liked, and I mean, Parasite just absolutely floored me when I saw it. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
I couldn't shut up about it. It's like it's just one of those movies where he's just completely something else. I mean, Barry Jenkins is definitely a filmmaker, a recent filmmaker that I've really come to love. Between Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk, I still need to watch. I still need to sit down and watch The Underground Railroad. It's just very hard for me to I need to get myself into the right mindset for something like that.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, Hitchcock is another one that I absolutely love. Kubrick is a filmmaker that I really love over the years. Spielberg, Scorsese, Tarkovsky was an immediate one for me that I did not expect to just be as entranced with his work as I ended up being. But
Yeah, I have kind of a hard time emotionally connecting with his movies, but he's so good at building worlds that are like close enough to our world, but they're just a little bit off.
Yeah.
And that he's basically unparalleled as far as I'm concerned in that aspect, but I've only seen Stalker and Solaris and have not been able to kind of really get emotionally invested, but still just in awe of it.
Yeah, I mean, Stalker was actually my first one, and that's a tough movie to make your first of him.
Yeah.
It's not an easy sit, but I was just completely transfixed by it when I first saw it. Solaris, I really like. I really like all of his films. I think he's such a wonderful filmmaker, and I think he's extremely gifted. But it's like there are some movies of his I'm a big fan of over others, and it's funny because some of them I really liked at first, and now I'm not as big a fan of, sort of like Solaris. But then Ivan's Childhood, his first film, I was like, it's a good movie, and now I really kind of love it the more I've seen it. And it's interesting to see how a filmmaker's films, especially the more you rewatch them, can really kind of hit you at specific times. I mean, I think that's one of the great things about sometimes great movies, or movies that even if you don't necessarily connect them with them when you're younger, if you rewatch them when you're older, it's like, okay, now I get it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Another filmmaker that I really love, and I still have a few that I haven't seen, is Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, he's just so prolific and is so interested in experimenting with release styles and film equipment, and, is very kind of restless. I mean, he, claimed he was retiring in, I guess, 2014. Then now he's put out 5 or 6 movies in the last years, I think.
Yep.
And even if they don't totally work, there's always something really interesting in them. But I've seen almost everything he's done in the last 4 or 5 years. And it's all good. Like I said, No Sudden Move is great, and High Flying Bird I really liked too. And so he's just a fascinating filmmaker. I finally saw Sex, Lies, and Videotape for the first time last year.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like, oh, wow, he was this good.
Yeah.
From the beginning. And so some of his lesser known movies I haven't gotten around to yet. But I've heard that he is supposed to, I think this fall, release a box set through his website of some of those forgotten movies of his that are kind of hard to find. That it's supposed to be, a very spiffy Blu-ray package with, all the movies are restored and special features and stuff. So that'll be interesting to see if that actually comes out, because he said that the rights to some of those movies that bombed, and I guess the studios don't really care. they're not going to release them on Blu-ray at all. So they're, the rights reverted back to him, so he can do what he wants with it. So
Yeah. As far as his earlier work, I've always really loved King of the Hill. I saw it very early on. It just really hit me when I first saw it, and I was so glad that Criterion added it to the collection because of the fact that it's like that was one of those earlier movies where I really liked it from him, but I wasn't sure if it was ever going to come out on DVD. And then when Criterion brought it out, it's like, oh, okay, there we go. Because I think I think
it's impossible to see unless you own the Blu-ray and it's popped up on the Criterion channel before. But
yeah,
it's hard to find.
Yeah, and I'm seriously because this is another one that I've been a huge fan of is Kafka, his second film. Yeah. And that's the one that I'm most excited for him to release because I know he's said he's recut the film, right. And I'm really fascinated as somebody who's owned the VHS for years, and that's basically how I've seen it. I really cannot wait to see what a newer cut of that movie looks like, and it's great because of the fact that it's like it's written by Len Dobbs, who did The Limey for him, and he also co-wrote Darkseid for Proyas. And I absolutely have always adored the score for that movie by Cliff Martinez. It's just something else. And I'm really excited to see that one eventually come back out and hopefully get rediscovered because of the fact that I think it is really one of those underrated sort of gems of his. But I mean, I would say probably more. I feel that way more about King of the Hill because I think that is a legitimately terrific film. But I mean, Kafka is kind of. It's kind of flawed. It's kind of predictable at times in terms of the structure, but I've just been always curious to see that revisited, and I was excited to learn that he had cut a new version of it.
Yeah, I do enjoy sometimes when directors keep going back and tinkering with it, like Apocalypse Now or Blade Runner, and finally they keep calling it the final cut. They finally get to do the version they want. I'll be interested to see. I haven't watched the new version yet, but I'd be interested to see the newly edited version of Godfather 3.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one yet. I'm kind of holding out hope that there's a 50th anniversary 4K of the entire trilogy next year, and that's included.
I feel like that's got to happen. I feel like they're going to have to do that. So.
Yeah. So, because I still have the first three on DVD in that box set that came out way back in the 2000s. But I mean, I haven't picked up the new version of the third one, but I've always been curious. I've been curious about because I've always thought the third one was not as bad as a lot of people say it is. I mean, it's certainly not as good as the first two, but it's not as bad as some people think.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it would have been a better movie if Winona Ryder hadn't dropped out and they would have paid Robert Duvall enough to come back.
Yeah.
But as it exists, I think it's still pretty good. And I guess it worked out for the best that Sofia Coppola was not a good actress because she became a very good director. And I don't think she ever acted again, which, ended up being
I think she's an extra. She's one of the Naboo she's one of the handmaidens in Phantom Menace.
Yes.
I think that was her last time, but
commercials and movies, but not a major star like that again. Yeah. I have been to Coppola's winery out in California, and it's terrific if you're ever out there.
Oh wow! Okay. Well, Kip, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and again, because and hopefully we'll stay on. I'll have you stay on the. I'll have you stay on the Zoom to so I can confirm to you that it does in fact say save this time. But yeah, it was great to talk to you again so quickly, and yeah, I appreciate you making the time tonight to talk to me.
Yeah, anytime. This was a lot of fun. So if you ever need me back, just let me know.
Okay. I'd like to thank Kip Mooney for joining me tonight. I apologize to him for the technical mix-up. Last week, like I said, we recorded, and as I was going to save, my recording program decided to crap out on me, but this time we are safe. So thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the Sonic Cinema Podcast. We have a lot of great things coming for you in August throughout the rest of the year. And we're going to start with a couple of discussions on filmmakers whom are considered two of the best to ever do it. That's it for me. This is Brian Scuttle. You can check out the podcast at Apple, Google, and Spotify podcasts, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel, where you'll also see quick reviews, as well as I plan on putting all my streams on the YouTube channel as well. And twitch.tv/Scuttle Lemur is where you will see me streaming. Try to do it once a week, as well as patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. And finally, my written work at www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much.